Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Ramaya, Director of the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council. I'm happy to welcome you for the first time, like I previously said, in 50 years. And last time it was in 1973 in Kenya. The annual meetings are back to the African continent here in Morocco, where we are live. We're happy to welcome you for this annual series. We launch every year on the occasion of the IMF and World Bank meetings. The goal is to raise the African voices during these strategic gatherings around the development matters and advance the African agenda in a very critical period of post-COVID challenges and also of economic consequences in the war of Ukraine. Today, the Africa Center, in cooperation with the Geo-Economic Center, welcomes the Finance Minister of Zambia, Situmbeko Muso Kotswane. Minister, thank you for being here with us. I will moderate this conversation with my colleague, Josh Lipsky, Senior Director of Geo-Economic Center. Mr. Minister, you have been appointed Minister of your country in August 2021 in the first government of President Ishilema. His historic election was a peaceful transition that was an inspiration for the African continent, like that have been said by the VP, the Vice President of the US, Kamala Harris, when she hosted him at the White House a few weeks after his election. President Ishilema has tasked you to ensure that Zambia's economy improves. Mr. Minister, welcome to Marrakesh, welcome to the Atlantic Council. We are happy to host you in April 2022 in Washington. And since then, a lot happened in your country. We have seen a lot of people visiting your country, from Kamala Harris I just mentioned, to Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen stressed how important your country is for the U.S. partnership. I will start, before giving the lead to my colleague Josh here. I will start with asking you how you assess and appreciate the situation, the economic situation in your country since last time we met in Washington. What happened?
Thank you very much for having me, and it's a pleasure once again to be able to talk to you. The question that you've asked is how do I see the economic situation in Zambia? A lot has happened in the past 2 years. When we came in office, Zambia was heavily indebted, had actually defaulted in paying the loans, and there seemed to be no clear way forward to resolve the problem. Now that this problem is to a large extent been resolved. We are just in the last bits of it, but to a large extent resolved. Zambia is going to get back into the league of countries which are respected in the financial world. Second point, when we came in, inflation was raging at about 22%. Now it has gone down, in fact, to about 12%. So that is progress. When we came in, confidence among the investors was rock bottom. Today, confidence has come back. It has come back because people have seen stability, they've seen resolve to solve the economic problems, they've seen an environment where there's peace and tranquility. So as we speak right now, that time when we came in, there was pressure for mining companies, for example, just among, as an example, exiting the country. Now mining companies are not only exploring, but they're expanding investments, and many more are coming to look at the opportunities. So a lot has changed. We have addressed issues of how to protect the vulnerable. School children were failing to go to school those days because their parents could not afford. Now they can go to school, sponsored or supported by the government. Schools that had no teachers, now more teachers have been employed. So the ones who are most vulnerable, like those who had retired from work, had not been paid their pension, now they get paid more or less as they retire. So a lot has happened in the last 2 years.
And the African Development Bank confirmed what you say by saying that the GDP is projected to grow at 4% in 2023 and more than 4.2 in 2024, but also mentioned the vulnerable you just talked about, and I would like to ask you about the specific measures, specifically on the rural areas, because in a recent Zambia Economic Outlook from the FDB, it was mentioned that over 50% of the population lives below the national poverty line, and the poverty rate is higher in rural areas, 77%, than in urban areas, 23%. So there is a huge gap that we don't see anywhere else, and I would like to ask if you have specific measures for this vulnerable in the rural areas.
Yes, the economy next year is projected to grow at 4.7%.
More than what FDB says?
Yes, because of the mining sector, tourism is coming up very strongly, manufacturing is coming up very strongly. Just to give you a specific example, we used to import all our fertilizers from Eastern Europe, maybe even some from here, Morocco. Now, from importing fertilizer, Zambia is now exporting fertilizers because of the expansion that has taken place. So indeed, going forward, the economy will continue to grow against the background of stability that I've talked about. You asked the question about poverty levels. Yes, that is statistics that came up a short while ago. You may be interested also to add that most of the poor people cited in that report are those that are involved in agriculture. Meaning that if you are involved in the agriculture sector, the chances are very high that you are going to be a poor person. And this was so because previously the price that the farmers were getting was on the low side. And because of that, over the years, we've seen many farmers trying to shift out of growing maize, which is a staple food, into other crops like soybean. But the point I want to drive home is that as part of the reforms, what the farmers produce will get paid better. In other words, farmers will now get a better price for their maize because that will induce them to produce more to feed the country. But also it is a direct answer to the question or to the information that you have cited. Why is it that those who are farming tend to be poor? So the answer to that from our government is going forward, the farmers will now be paid a better price for their produce. That, of course, introduces a problem. Those who live in the urban areas, some of them with low-paying jobs, they will say food has become very expensive. So we must find a solution to that as well. And for that, there are a number of issues that we have laid on the table. Firstly, the fact that many of these people were paying for their children in school before, now government is paying for these children, which means that the financial burden of most poor people has been reduced because they don't have to pay school fees. The parents are paying for school fees. That is a direct measure of support to those who are vulnerable. Secondly, poor people receive cash payments in Zambia. If you are, I think, from 60 years going forward, you have no job, you have no support, government pays you. This amount of money has been increased from what it was when we came into office and is now more consistent. So it is not just there on paper, but every 2 months they get something, every 2 months they get something, every 2 months they get something. Thirdly, in the first, those people who retire from work, from government, they've worked for 30 years, 40 years for government. When it's time to retire, to get their financial benefits from the pensions were bankrupt. They were not being paid. They had to wait for 4, 5 years, sometimes 6 years. Now, when you retire, in 3 months, you start getting your payments. From waiting for 5 years, now within 3 years, you get your payment. So these are some of the issues that we have addressed on how to support the most vulnerable people.
Thank you very much, Minister. Maybe before coming back to the agriculture and the answer you just provided in details, we can mention the partnerships you have in support of your action at the governmental level. And I would like to leave this to my colleague, Josh Lipsky here, Senior Director of the Geoeconomic Center.
Well, thank you, Rama, and thank you again, Minister, for being with us and explaining the situation in Zambia's economy, which is of great interest. I want to ask you about one of the most important issues at these IMF World Bank meetings, and that's the status of debt negotiations that Zambia has been part of, along with official creditors, going on 2 years now. And there was the breakthrough in Paris, and we expect, and we have heard from IMF officials, and you said yourself, we're at the last little bits, looking to an MOU here at the meetings. Can you give us any update on the status and whether you expect a final agreement in the coming days?
Yes, and we must thank all the countries and institutions that have been cooperating with us because we are one of the countries that has made significant progress in terms of resolving the debt issue. When you compare Zambia with many other countries, we have come from behind. We are well ahead now. Thank you, partners, for that. Yes, we came to an agreement in June, and we are hoping that we'll sign the memorandum of understanding soon. I cannot give you a date because it's not possible for me to do that, but we are hopeful that it will happen. So yes, we've moved very far ahead. But coming here is not just about talking about debt. There's a whole issue of how we manage our relationships with various partners. Partners with bilateral countries, partners with multilateral institutions, and these partners, as you can see, all sorts of people coming to these meetings. And we take advantage of that because we believe as Zambia that resolving the debt issues does help, but it is not the ultimate in uplifting the standards of living of the young people in the country. It's not the ultimate, and please take note, these days, unlike in the past, governments could cheat citizens to say, if you are suffering, everyone in the world is suffering. Today they have access to internet, so they can tell how the Kenyans live, they can tell how the Germans live, they can tell how the Mauritians live. If you have a problem, they will tell you that we are suffering, but those are not suffering. So we need to address the issue of how this low level of incomes, how poverty can be reduced. And we believe very strongly that the ultimate to reducing poverty is to have an economy that grows. So when we come to a place like this, it is an opportunity to speak to the private sector, to the investors, to tell them what we've done in Zambia to create conditions that are conducive to investment, for them to make money, for them to pay taxes when they make money. And we don't want to attract anyone who says, I don't want to make profits. We want them to come and make profits because that's the way they pay their taxes. So we tell them about the opportunities, more especially the fact that everyone is talking about the transition to the green economy. And we are an answer to that, because the transition economy requires copper, which we mine in large quantities. It requires nickel, which we mine in big quantities. It requires manganese. It requires lithium. We have all these minerals. So we tell the investment community about these opportunities. Come and work with us. Come and mine. Come and add value. So this meetings is an opportunity to make these stories.
No, thank you for that, and thank you for, I think what you said is so important. The debt restructuring, the debt negotiations is just about getting that done so you can move forward on all the issues you outlined.
Precisely,
an important
yes.
reminder of
Precisely.
that. I wanted to pick up on something you said about partnerships, because you talked about the process of these negotiations being so much about partnerships, maintaining partnerships with other countries and building them. What advice would you give to other countries that are now dealing with similar negotiations that you've gone through the past few years? Lessons you've learned. There's so much interest now in negotiating with China as largest bilateral lender. What would you say to other countries that are in a place you were in maybe a year or a year and a half ago?
I think the most important thing is to recognize and accept that you have a problem. This sounds easy, but it's not always the case, especially for governments that created a problem. It may be hard for them to say we have a debt problem, because then they incite the question, how did you get into a debt problem? You are the cause. But that notwithstanding, I think the most important thing is to recognize that you have a problem, because a problem properly recognized, you are ready towards a solution. So for us, when we came in, and it was easy because we could simply say they caused the problem, we didn't cause it, but we came out and said there is a problem, we need to solve this. Point number one. Point number two, you have to create partnerships. Okay? There are partnerships who are creditors. You have no choice but to talk to the creditors. Okay? Then there are partners like the Bretton Woods institutions, because these are the ones that are a bridge between you and the creditors. The creditors want proof that you are a responsible group worth helping to come out. If they don't trust you, if they don't think you are credible, of course, why should they restructure your debt? It's a journey to nowhere. So the IMF, World Bank, and other multilaterals, they are the bridge. They are the ones who tell the creditors, in our assessment, these people are credible. They are taking the necessary reforms to get themselves out of trouble. So those partnerships are important. The third thing, it's not enough to have the IMF and the World Bank to speak for you. You yourselves must demonstrate that you are serious about correcting the situation. Okay? You must undertake the reforms. In our case, for example, we said, okay, we have a debt problem. We are now going to put a law in place which ties down governments, this government, starting from this government going forward, ties down our flexibility in terms of just going everywhere to collect loans. Very powerful. Parliament must now approve. This is the way you want to borrow as government. Parliament must say yes. So we put a law in place, and also binding constraints. You cannot borrow X percentage against some metric like GDP or something like that. That was a powerful message to say they've realized they made a mistake. They now want to correct those things. Another aspect of you yourself demonstrating that you are serious, our own money. Our own money. This is money that is now applied for the most serious of all possible government programs. Spending it on education, making sure that children are supported. Even the poorest child can go to high school without their parents paying, because government will pay. Hiring teachers, providing money for classrooms to be built, desks to be built. These are aspects of you demonstrating seriousness. You have realized you have a problem. You start off by making sure that your own money, you utilize it properly. There are many other examples of showing that you are serious. But the last example I can give in terms of seriousness is back to the point of saying debt restructuring only gives you an opportunity, but it's not the ultimate. The ultimate is to grow the economy. So the reforms that we're undertaking to create a more conducive environment, the reforms that we undertook to bring the mining sector taxation to median level, because before we are overtaxing, and mining companies were not interested, even when they knew there was copper in the country. The reforms that we've undertaken to make sure that the business person has less hassle. Today, you can register a company on your phone. You don't need to go to the office. On your phone, you can register a company. On your phone, you can register for tax to be a tax person. On your phone, you don't need to go there. On your phone, you can do land transactions. These are some of the reforms that we've undertaken, and many more are coming. Issues of, for example, issues of labor market flexibility, because most of us, it was an issue of, okay, every employee, the salary is going to be like this, and this is the law. Now we are saying we are going to change. If it is required for the employer to say, okay, this is the base salary for everybody, but if you produce more, I'll pay you more. If you produce less, I'll find a way of dealing with you. This is a reform that we have announced that we are going to, because all this is about making people produce more. That's how an economy grows. Yeah. Reforms of being more flexible in issuing out work permits. There's been a tendency to think that you create jobs by blocking out expatriates. Of course, we want jobs for our local people. There's no negotiations about that. But also you have to realize that in countries where investors are allowed a bit more flexibility to bring in expats and people they trust, for every expatriate that comes, more jobs are created. So now we are going to change. The more jobs that we create, the more expatriate workers are going to be allowed. So these are examples of the reform that we're undertaking to make the economy grow, and with that, everything else that we are talking about.
Thank you for that fulsome answer, and I think it's very helpful for so many countries to hear what you said about recognizing you have a problem, going through the difficult work, and having the conversations with the official creditors, which we know have not been easy over the past few years. I want to turn to Rama. I have one final question. We only have a few minutes left, but Rama, back to you.
Thank you, Josh. Minister, you just mentioned one of your measures, like tax registration, for example, for people, which means that in your country too, the digital revolution is important for the economy. And you also said that the youth is aware of where you are in terms of trying to resolve the debt, distress, etc. So my question is about the informal sector, because we know that the tax process is important to reduce the informal sector for the World Bank, for example. Do you think that the informal sector that is so important in Europe and African countries, and Asian and Southern countries, do you think that it is a curse and that people should fight the informal sector, or do you think that maybe these international institutions should be more educated about the importance of this economy, even if it's informal. How do you appreciate this question?
Of course, the informal sector is part of life, more so in Africa, where it is a big segment of the economy. But I also want to say that many people in our countries end up in the informal sector because they have no choice. They have not much choice. There are others who are doing very well, they like it. Whether they are given a job in the formal sector or not, they will say, no, I don't want it. That's fine. But many others go in the formal sector because there is no other viable choice. This is why, with all these measures that I'm talking about, to increase the size of the formal sector so that those who feel they don't need to go in the informal sector, they can also thrive. But of course, we have also recognized the role of the informal sector now. This is why in the budget that we just passed, there are a number of budgetary provisions made to support the youth, to support the women, under various credit schemes, so that those who are in the informal sector, because they have to be there, then they can be able to do something. For example, previously in Zambia, to buy desks, school desks, we used to import them. This government says from now onwards, no one imports a desk from anywhere. And it's a rural school. They must support a local carpenter to make the desks, and the money is being sent to the rural areas, so that the rural areas, if they are building a school, they must find one amongst themselves to build the school, not somebody from the capital city. If they have to buy desks, they themselves, within their local community, they must support the local carpenters. We buy them tools to make the desks. So this is the way we are supporting the informal sector.
I know we're almost out of time in your extraordinarily busy schedule. I want to ask one final question about trade settlement and local currency. We saw an announcement from your president visiting China recently, and the increase in interest in using settlement and local currencies and trade. And that's a trend we're seeing more broadly, not just in Zambia. I'm wondering if you have any more specifics you can share on that, but also the broader issue we hear debated at these meetings about trying to diversify away from the US dollar.
Well, I think for us the most important thing is that we also have to recognize that the settlement in bilateral currencies is nothing new. In the olden days of the Dutch mark, the French franc, and so forth, there were settlements across the world. So similarly today, if there's a country that we do trade with, and there's appetite to do settlements bilaterally, there's nothing strange about it. But that is not to say that all the trade will be handled like that, because you can only do it where it is practical. Okay? You can only do it where it is practical. For example, you spoke about China. If China imports copper from Zambia, and we import something from China, there is a scope for settlement across those currencies. But no one should be scared to think that now we are going to dump the dollar or the what. That's not our intention. Yeah. It's just more direct. That's not our intention to dump the dollar or any other currency. Where there are opportunities for that, why not?
Yeah. I know our U.S. audience will be happy to hear that answer.
Yeah. I mean, like between Zambia and Malawi, for example, people can now settle across our currencies without going through the US dollar directly. Between us and South Africa, in fact, the whole of the SADC area, the whole of the commerce area, the arrangements already in place, which have already been in place for people to settle across. So we are not fighting anyone. Yeah.
Minister, thank you. I'll turn to Rama to
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Josh. It was a pleasure, Minister. We have to wrap up now,
Yeah.
but I think we had the opportunity to cover many topics very important for your country. Obviously, you don't want your country to be defined only through the depth conversations. Zambia is much bigger than that and is endowed with many resources, and including the human resources. So, so now you have reached an agreement with your creditors and on a debt treatment and consistent with the IMF, etc. I hope you will get the results you expect from this agreement, and hopefully your stay here in Marrakesh will be productive with them. Final word from you before we close this discussion.
Well, just to thank you once again for having me, and wish you the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Stay with us the rest of the day at the Atlantic Council live from the IMF World Bank meetings in Marrakesh. Have a great rest of the day.